A little bit on some of the treatment spaces in St. Luke's. This is referred to as our independent living apartment. We took a couple of the hospital rooms and we just converted them into an apartment. And the purpose of this independent living apartment is so that patients and family can spend a night or two there before they go home if the patient is impaired enough that they're going to have to depend on someone else to do transfers. So when I use the term transfers, are you familiar with that word? Okay, so in a rehab or hospital setting, transfers are going to be when the patient moves from one body position to another. And so they might have a transfer from bed to out of bed, or they might have a transfer from a wheelchair onto a toilet seat, or they might have a transfer from a wheelchair into a bathtub. And so all of those would involve activities of daily living. And so transfers are actually an ADL. This space allows the caregivers and the patients to live for a couple of nights in an environment like that so they can practice things like transfers before they actually get to the home environment. And so we like offering this to the patients so that it actually increases the confidence of the caregivers that they can be successful once the patient gets home and being able to help them with all of these different transfers that have to be done on a daily basis. Another space is our adaptive technology lab, and so we've got various types of technology that we like to expose patients to who might have been fully functional before an injury, and then after an injury, all of a sudden they may not have use of arms. And so there need to be other ways that we can help them communicate with, for example, a computer keyboard or with a computer. And so we have eye gaze technologies there in this lab space. We have voice to text technologies that we employ, adaptive keyboards and different types of pointing devices so that patients can try some of these before discharge so that they can begin making that adaptation to be able to use computers after discharge. This is another one of our treatment spaces, or actually a couple of them. The pictures over here on this side are what is referred to as St. Luke's community. And so it's an environment, it's all indoors. And the reason we built it all indoors, even though we have a space that has a whole bunch of modes of transportation that would be outdoor modes of transportation, we build it indoors so that no matter what the weather, we're able to get patients in there without having them come out soaked because it might be raining or snowing. And you can see that we've got a series of different forms of transportation. So we have a Cougar, let's see, it's Crimson, right? Cougar Crimson. So we have a Crimson sedan. We have a white SUV that patients can practice transfers into and out of the vehicles. And then we have a fuselage for an airplane. You can see it's painted with the Southwest Airline colors back there. We searched worldwide to try to find a portion of a plane fuselage and finally found one in England. You can't fit a plane fuselage inside of a plane fuselage to get it over the ocean, so they had to actually cut it in half, send it over in two pieces, and when it got to St. Luke's, and they re-welded it together again. But it's an actual plane fuselage, has airline seats in it, and so if the patient is going to be taking a trip or if they're going to have to fly to get home, then this allows them to practice transfers into and out of airline seats, which if you've been on the airlines lately, you know that's a challenge even for somebody that's able-bodied. And then back behind it, let me see if my pointer works, back here, that's a Spokane Transit Authority bus, or at least a portion of it. So it allows patients to get some experience with being able to get on and off of public transportation. And so that would be the outside environment in St. Luke's community. Then we also have an inside environment down here. So we can see that there is a Washington Trust Bank symbol right there. This is a banking module right here if patients want to practice banking transactions. And so our OTs will take the patients down there and run them through a series of tasks to make sure that they can practice activities like that. And if you go a little further back into St. Luke's community, the indoor portion of it, here is Walgreens shopping area back here that the patients can go on simulated shopping trips. So how many of you know Kayla Robertson? Okay, several of you do. So Kayla used this space, the shopping area in St. Luke's community for data collection for her project. And then we have over here, it's hard to read that, but that says Lehman Law Firm. You know, when you're in healthcare, you always like to have some attorneys on your side. And so this was a company that does a lot of work with people that have had traumatic brain injuries that might have been caused by someone else and not them. And so they said, yeah, we want our name up in St. Luke's community. So they built an office space for us that patients can do very simple tasks, everything from trying to file things alphabetically, which maybe that doesn't sound like a challenge to you, but you layer a brain injury on top of somebody's cognitive capabilities, and even something as simple as being able to alphabetize things becomes difficult. And so that would be the office area, and then right here, this little area right here is actually a Red Lion lobby space. It's not really that functional, except we figured out how to make it functional. So a project that I did with several of Diane's students, there's a chair right there that we would have as a starting point for a task that we would have patients engage in. We'll see it a little bit later with while they had wearables on, the shimmers, I think that was that project. So this was the space that we actually collected data in for that particular project. So we'll take a look at that a little bit later. So those would be two treatment spaces that are used quite a bit. The patients really like going down and using these because they are as real as possible. They don't have to suspend reality too much to be able to realize that this is going to help them to know whether they have these capabilities, or at least gain confidence in capabilities once they are discharged. But we also have an outside area that is, we call it our terrain park. And so you can see that we've got a series of steps right here. So the same thing right there, that have changes in elevation. We have different types of terrains that the patients can go on. Here's some cobblestone down here. I could have taken better pictures of this so you can see some things. There's a series of stairs right there. So if an individual has gone from being fully ambulatory to all of a sudden not being able to ambulate at all, so that they might be wheelchair bound, they need practice with these types of environments. And so this area helps them to gain some practical experience with how to negotiate things like steps, or being on surfaces that are a little uneven. Maybe they are ambulatory, but they have to use a walker. And so we want to give them some experiences with being on uneven surfaces when they're ambulating. Yes.
For the indoor community, are you able to alter the environment in terms of like increasing noise or distractors, things that would be very distressing for someone who might have experienced a brain injury?
Yeah. It tends to be a busy space at certain times of the day, so some of our therapists actually they will plan when they want to be down there based on whether they want the patient to be in a busy environment or not be in a busy environment. And so so our therapists are really innovative about how they use these particular spaces. But even something as, you can't see it, but right in the middle right here, there is a section that has greeting cards. And after someone has had, if I use the term TBI, do you know what that is? Most people know what that is nowadays, traumatic brain injury. So if somebody has had a TBI and you put them in an environment where they have a whole rack of greeting cards and they have to find one that's for a niece's graduation, that can be a tremendously complex environment for them to be able to scan and understand what it is they're looking for. And so just being in this environment itself can be something that is can induce noise. And it was by design that we developed it that way, so that we could work with patients on scanning the environment visually to see if they could find what they're being cued to find. So the environment itself can create a lot of noise. Other questions? Let's take a look at some of the technologies that are employed at St. Luke's. So this is our Locomat system. Down here you can see that it has a ramp that leads up to, there's a little treadmill right here. And so if a patient is in a wheelchair, we can get them up the ramp and onto the treadmill, be able to get them set up in the Locomat, have them go to a stand, an assisted stand, and then move their wheelchair off of the Locomat so they can practice walking. And so this is going to be mainly, well, in fact, we exclusively use it for patients that have impaired walking ability. Either they have a complete spinal cord injury or even an incomplete spinal cord injury that has taken away the ability to walk, or they might have a neurodegenerative condition that is causing them to become progressively weaker so that they don't have the ability to support their weight. To get this whole system to work, the patients wear, you can see on this fellow's leg right there, and then there's one on the other side over here. It's exoskeletons that the patients that are strapped onto the patient's legs, and then in addition to having the exoskeletons, the patient has their body weight supported. So we have a harness system right there. You can see that this guy's wearing a harness, and then he's hoisted up so that we can go all the way. We can accommodate people that are up to 300 pounds. And we can support all the way down to 20% of body weight. And then these orthoses that the patient wears are entrained so that when the treadmill starts to move, the orthoses actually perform a walking pattern. And it can be everything from the orthoses pretty much controlling the walking pattern, or we can begin to back down the amount of gain so that if the patient has any volitional capability, they can use as much volition as they possibly can. And so before this type of device was available, this gait assistance robot device, it would involve at least 3 therapists. One therapist that would help the patient stabilize their pelvis while walking, while they were in a harness system, and then a therapist on either side of the patient to help move the leg through the walking pattern repetitively. And so we were wearing out therapists. And so this system moves away from that so that you have a single therapist that is actually pretty much just overseeing the session with the Locomat. The whole idea with this is that we want individuals to be able to retrain walking ability. That's really tough to do. Really tough to do. Questions about the Locomat? Yeah.
How long have you been using it, and what sort of success rate are you seeing?
We've had this Locomat for probably 6 years. And if the patient has, so there are kind of 2 broad categories of spinal cord injury. There's complete and incomplete. If a person has complete spinal cord injury, it means there's been something so severe that one part of the spinal cord is disconnected physically from the other part. Incomplete means that there's some residual nerve fibers that have not been severed. With patients that have incomplete, we've had some pretty good success stories. If they have complete spinal cord injury, There's just nothing out there right now that's going to cause a full repair of the spinal cord. Not that people aren't trying. There's a lot of microtubules that have been developed that can be implanted into the gap in the spinal cord, and then they can put growth factors in to try to get neurons to make fresh connections. But the nervous system is so complex that even efforts like that have not really been something that would cause a person to go from being non-ambulatory to ambulatory. So we still have a long way to go with being able to repair actual complete spinal cord injuries. Incomplete spinal cord injuries, we have great success. What usually happens is that if we've got a really highly motivated patient, they will begin working with something like the Locomat, and will eventually transfer them to a frame that has wheels on it that we can support their body weight while they walk across ground. And so when we see patients like that, man, it just brings, everybody knows that the efforts are worth it when you begin seeing people that are regaining something as simple as being able to walk 20 feet. There was a question back here.
Oh, with just like 17 days as an average for spinal cord injuries, like for folks who stay at St. Luke's, are people coming back for outpatient? Okay.
Yeah, we're pretty much the only game in town in terms of seeing people with spinal cord injury. And so as people age into the injury, we have people that have had their injuries 25, 30 years ago that are still coming back to receive care at St. Luke's. And it's mainly because primary care really doesn't know how to manage some of the issues that somebody that is non-ambulatory would have across time. Skin integrity is a big thing. Another one would be things like being able to manage blood pressure. If you can't use your legs to help with venous return, all of a sudden you have big issues with fluctuations in blood pressure. So the doctors that work in a rehab environment are referred to as physiatrists, and they have pretty specialized techniques for being able to manage blood pressure in patients that don't have normal venous return. So a couple of other things at St. Luke's, we have what's called an FES bike, functional electrical stimulation. And so here's a good example where you can see electrodes attached to this looks like it's probably on his tibialis anterior, and then the quadriceps. Looks like he might even have some on the gastroc muscles. I don't see any on his hamstrings, but you can attach these electrodes to quads, hamstrings, and lower legs, and it can assist with a little bit of electrical impulse into the muscles. It can assist an individual with being able to perform a cycling motion. And so this would be for individuals that either have lost all capability for being able to move the legs or have some residual capability, and as a way for them to be able to get some type of cycling activity. You can see that both of these individuals have pulled up to the machine. This is what it looks like without a human or a wheelchair near it. But you can see that we can put a wheelchair right up next to the machine, get the electrodes hooked up, and the individual can get activity that is vigorous enough that they can have a cardiovascular response. And so that's the nice thing about it and that's another thing that really deteriorates when somebody becomes completely wheelchair bound, is that their cardiovascular system starts to have problems. And so this is a good way to be able to get them some type of cardiovascular training. Yes?
How often do they need to do something like that to kind of prevent or slow down atrophy?
Ideally, you'd want somebody to do this 3 times a week. We've gone to a system where After a patient after their insurance company says we're not going to give you any more visits, we know that patients still need to have some form of activity. And so with this particular system, we've gone to a system where we allow patients to come in on their own and use the FES bike. And they know where the electrodes need to go. They usually have a caregiver that accompanies them that we can train to turn the machine on and off. And then we just let patients exercise on their own. And so they realize that it's necessary to maintain cardiovascular fitness. The other thing that begins to deteriorate when we're not doing weight bearing is the skeletal system. And so the electrical activity that causes contraction of the muscles can provide enough stimulus that you don't see osteoporosis set in to as great a degree as it would if they were receiving no input. So just the muscles tugging on the bones is enough of an input to slow down the osteoporosis. Let's see. Augmentative and alternative communication. That's a mouthful, so we'll just call it AAC. So these are going to be communication means that patients can use if they've lost the ability to produce speech or if they've lost the ability to write. This is a keyboard right here. You can see that you have a camera up here that actually tracks where the pupil is looking on the keyboard, and then the individual can give a signal that could be something as simple as blinking the eye or just maintaining gaze long enough at whatever the letter is that they want to type out, and then they can actually communicate with this form of with this technology. Here's an individual that we can see wheelchair bound. You don't want to necessarily have the AAC, the keyboard, right in front of the individual if they're wheelchair bound, because they need to be able to see where they're going. So a lot of times it's over to the side, and when they're ready to communicate, they can gaze at the keyboard to be able to put together whole sentences if they want to. It's a driving simulator, so it took me about 2 years to cobble together enough grant support to be able to purchase this, and we finally were able to purchase it so that we could replace this system down here, which was basically a laptop that we had opened up, and we had to put together this series of foot switches. So these are going to be the accelerator and the brake and so forth, and then we just have a gaming steering wheel. And anybody played the game Pong? You know what that is? Reminded me of playing Pong when you would drive on this thing. And the first time I drove with the old system, I was running out of the lanes. I mean, I was terrible on it. And so I thought, well, I want to try it again. So 2 minutes later, I got back on and tried it again, and I had vast improvement. So what does that tell you about the usefulness of this device? Did my driving ability really improve? Not very realistic. And so, so the whole idea here is that we wanted to get a system that would allow the patients to suspend reality enough to know that they weren't actually in a car, but would give all other sensations that they were driving. And so we were able to purchase this system here. It's been in use almost a year, and our OTs, so all the different therapies carve out the areas, the functions that they want to be in charge of. So PTs are in charge of gait, OTs are in charge of upper extremity things, but they've also carved out driving as kind of their domain. And so, so our occupational therapists are the ones that take patients in and put them on these simulated drives, and the patients love it because it's a safe environment, nobody gets hurt. It gives them a window into their capabilities after something like a stroke or a TBI. And sometimes oftentimes, always, it allows the therapist to be able to give the patient coaching about whether something driving is going to be a capability for them at discharge or something that they may be able to wait until they try to get back behind the wheel. So, we've got a whole bunch of different things that are pre-designed scenarios built into the software that allow the patient to go on drives with different intentions in mind. And so it really is a fairly fine-grained assessment of driving capability, at least in in-clinic driving situation. This is a device, I've let the therapist use it for about a year, and now we're beginning to design a couple of studies where we want to start using this for research purposes. So questions about this? This system, one reason I wanted to get this system is there's a little latch right there, one on the other side. We can actually take the back half of this and wheel it away. So it's a completely wireless. The control system back here where the clinician is, completely wireless. We can move that away so that somebody in a wheelchair can roll right up and be able to work with the functioning part of the simulator.
Do you see any motion sickness or anything like
Yes, we have sim sickness. Anybody into virtual reality? Okay. How do you keep from getting sick? Yeah, okay. Yeah, certain proportion of people, the latest figure I've seen is about 30% of the population, when they experience things like virtual reality, or in this case, driving simulator, they get nauseated. And so we have our little barf cups that we keep in the room just in case, but we also do some things to try to trick the body into thinking it's in motion. And so I keep the temperature in the room pretty low. That's one thing that can bring on nausea, is if you're too warm. There's also a fan in the room so that we turn on whenever we have patients in there, so that they have some air moving across the skin, which makes the body think it's in motion. And then the other thing that we do is we turn the lights out so that the main visual cues are going to be the 3 monitors that we have up here. And we also, there used to be a really nice framed picture in the background that you could just catch out of your peripheral vision. And so I had our facilities people move that so there are no background visual cues. And then a couple of weeks ago, I go back in the room and they took one of the hand dispensers for hand wipe and they put it right next to the simulator. So I had to go get the guys and say, nope, take it down, move it back over to the wall that it was on. I had no idea why they moved it to begin with. But again, it was just a visual cue that you don't want to have. You want the individual to be focusing on the virtual reality so that they think they're in motion. So we do have to sometimes have inoculation drives with patients, just a real short drive to kind of get them used to it before we do a longer drive. So there are different ways that you can try to approach the phenomena of simulator sickness. The software was developed with a group of OTs, and so this records driving behavior. Everything from number of line crossings to the amount of time that they were above the speed limit or dangerously below the speed limit. It will record things like braking distance, how far from, for example, the line at a stop sign the vehicle was stopped. So it records all of these different metrics depending upon the drive that the individual's doing, and that way the therapist can go over it with the patient. The other thing that you might think, well, why don't you just get them in a car and get them out on the street? Well, just imagine this: if you walked outside right now and took a drive and then came back in and we said, okay, now go back out and do it again, you'd never experience the same environment 2 times on a drive. With this, we can test them under the exact same conditions as many times as we want to, so that we can see if there's changes in performance as the individual experiences these drives. So that provides another advantage to an in-clinic assessment.